All right, let's go ahead and give this a try for our segment on costs. And so we're going to be messing around with a whole series of costs. The goal is to get around to answering three basic questions. The basic questions that we're eventually going to get to are referred to as the break-even problem, which is where you're looking for the scale where you're just indifferent between engaging in the economic enterprise and not. And so you're looking at having enough revenue to cover your fixed cost above and beyond your variable cost. We're also going to be looking at the make versus buy decision, which is going to be the choice between two different technologies. And so basically we're looking at, given a known scale, how do you actually satisfy the service requirements you have there? And then finally we're going to be looking at optimal pace kinds of problems. So this is going to be deciding things like how many shifts you're actually going to use, or ultimately how many hours do you stay open. And it's going to come down to a relatively simple. In order to get there, we're going to talk about a whole series of costs. Now, here's where a little bit of knowledge of microeconomics is going to come in handy. Any of you that have taken Econ 201, this will be extremely familiar to you. But we'll be defining two kinds of costs, which are going to be fixed and variable costs. We'll be combining them together in order to create something that's called total costs. And this family of costs here will be transformed into all sorts of average costs, incremental costs, differential costs, and other items along in this realm. It will not be all that bad. It is not as difficult as it originally looks. And again, those of you who have taken Econ 201, this will seem like an absolute piece of cake to you. So let's go ahead and define for us our two different kinds of costs. This is a little bit different from what your book may have, because your book is oriented towards a little bit further to accounting than I'm willing to go. I'm an economist, so there'll be some things which are different. But we'll define for us two kinds of costs: fixed costs and variable costs. Your book defines a third kind of cost, which is semi-variable. But I suggest that anytime you have an item which is semi-variable, take for example hiring an employee, there is some component which is variable, and that's going to be their hourly wage, which changes depending upon how many hours you use that particular employee. And there's also going to be a fixed component to it, which is going to be the amount of insurance, which is the same no matter how many hours that they go ahead and act. I'm going to create for you two definitions of fixed and variable cost, one of which is functional. So if you're thinking about it in pure math terms, the other one is going to be statistical when you're talking about trying to detect it. So fixed costs are those costs that are uncorrelated. With the volume index. For the most part, you should be able to think of the volume index as just quantity. It's how much you're producing. We'll have a discussion later that the volume index is actually some much richer measure. It is also a statistical measure, which means that you can have choices of volume index, some of which will be better than others for other purposes. And so this right here we have is the statistical definition. And the functional definition is going to be that you're dealing with costs that do not change when the volume index changes. So to illustrate graphically what we're looking at, as we measure on the horizontal axis right here, the volume index, which I'll express as a Q over a T, so it's a flow, how much is being produced. You can think of this as being, say, plates of food during a day at a restaurant. And we'll measure the fixed cost up here in dollars. In the functional sense, what you're looking at is a function that has its cost not changing as the volume index moves around. So this is a constant, the same all the time. For the statistical relationship, you're talking about a cost which is uncorrelated with. the other. Now you can have uncorrelated in terms of a large blob of dots right here, but this is a way of saying that it's approximately something which does not change, is uncorrelated with any changes. And so you cannot go ahead and say you have a higher probability of observing a higher cost of this type whenever the volume index increases. Now, variable costs are going to be quite similar, except you just got to change a couple of words. So with variable costs, they're in the back. All you got to do to get there is that these are costs which are correlated with the volume index, and these are costs that do change when the volume index changes. And this is how you end up getting the definitions of variable costs that are hiding around right there. Now, we typically combine these two together. Into something that's called total cost. We just add them up. And what you'll end up with altogether, with the volume index right down here, that's quantity per time period, is some kind of functional fixed cost, it's right here, and also added to it chunk, which is going to be the variable cost. So it's a variable cost added to a fixed cost in order to give you a total cost. Now, the assumptions that we have about the relationship between quantity and variable costs and quantity and fixed costs are relatively loose. All that's required is that variable cost is going to be monotonic. That means the more you try to produce, the more expensive it is. It never becomes cheaper to produce more. Now, it could be that it could be cheaper per unit, but it always will cost more in order to produce more. And that's a strong assumption. See how this kind of wavers up, but it never quite dodges down. And so this is the basic relationship that we're going to have between fixed cost, variable cost, and total cost. You're simply adding them up together. So there should be some kind of break.